for today's video, I'm going to be talking about por versus para, and por and para in Spanish both mean for, like in English, but they are used in different ways when you're trying to say for in Spanish. So I'll go into when you use por and when you use para. Okay, so here's por versus para, and I'm going to signify things with para with red and things with por with blue. Okay, so first I'm going to explain por. In por, generally you use with numbers, units of measure, and things that relate to a duration. The acronym you can remember to when you use por is dumbest. And it's spelled like for the acronym D-U-M-B-B-E-S-T. And then I'll go through what each letter means. Okay, so the D in dumbest stands for duration. So an example of this is if you're trying to say they talk for 3 hours, you would say ellos hablan por 3 horas. So it's like a duration of time you use por. The U stands for unit of measure. An example of this is if you're saying the metro goes 50 kilometers per hour, then you would say el metro va 50 kilómetros por hora. So por can also signify per, like per hour. Okay, so the M stands for mode, and it's like mode of transportation, mode of communication. So if you're trying to say they talk through Snapchat or they talk by Snapchat, you would say ellos hablan por Snapchat. This would be an example of mode of communication. If you're saying they flew by the plane, then you would say ellos fueron por avión. So por stands for how you travel, like mode of transportation, or how you talk, mode of communication. The first B in the acronym, dumbest, is because of. So you use por when you're trying to say something that translates to because of. So an example would be if we're trying to say we are excited because of the concert, or we are excited for the concert. So that means estamos emocionados por el concierto. So por in this case stands for because of. So yeah. The second B in the acronym stands for by. And this is what you might have already seen. So usually when you're trying to say by me, or like your name, so if I was saying in a presentation by Avina, it would be por Avina. Or you could also say, like if you're saying the person who wrote this book, or this book is by this author, you would use por. The E in the acronym stands for exchange. And so you use por when you're trying to make exchanges for things. So if you're trying to say, I gave you $5 for the cookie, then you would say, yo te di $5 por tu galleta. So you're using por to signify that you exchange your $5 for the cookie. So in this case, you use por. The S stands for search, and this one is a little bit confusing, but if you're trying to say, I go to the office to find the paper, or like I go to the office for finding the paper, then you would say ella va a la oficina por el papel. So you're trying to say like for when you are searching for something. And lastly, the T in the acronym stands for through. such as going somewhere by passing through. So I walk through the park. Yo camino por el parque, because I'm walking through the park. Okay, so here are some translations that por can signify. So in general, yes, por stands for, but it can also mean because of, by, through, per. And as you can tell though, all of these translations are related to numbers, exchanging, math, measures, which is different than when you use para. Also, with por, there are por expressions that you can use, and these are times that you always use por, but this is a little bit more advanced. Okay, so now I'm going to be talking about para, and as I mentioned before, para also means for, but is used in different ways. So para is commonly used when you what you like personally think, what you personally are doing, what you are giving. So it's more about opinions and thinking, compared to por, which is more measure and exchanging. Okay, so for the acronym of remembering when to use para instead of por is periodic. And I will go through what periodic stands for, just like I did for por. Okay, so the P in periodic, the acronym used to when you want to know when to use para, is purpose. So purpose would be like I'm doing this for a certain reason, and that would be the purpose, so that's why you use para. So an example would be, I buy food for the party. The for is the purpose. You're buying food because of the purpose of the party. So in Spanish, it would be, yo compro comida para la fiesta, which means I buy food for the party, which is purpose. The E in periodic stands for employment. So when you're trying to say, I work for someone, or I work for this place, I work for this clinic, you would use para because it's your employment. So if you're trying to say she works for the clinic, it would be ella trabaja para la clínica. You would use para because it's employment. The R stands for recipient, which is you are receiving the gift. So an example of this is saying, my dad makes a cake for me. So in this case, it would be, mi padre hace un pastel para mí. And since I'm receiving it, it would be for me, para mí. The first I in periodic stands for in order to. And this is also, this is like the most common way you use para. So if you're trying to say, I practiced in order to win, or I did this in order to, you would use para. So as I mentioned before, I practiced in order to win would be, yo practico para ganar. I practice in order to win. So you use para. Another way you use para is opinion. And so in periodic, the O stands for opinion. And in this case, it would be like, for me, in my opinion, for me is when you use para. So if I'm trying to say, for me, the salsa is hot or spicy, I would say, para mí, la salsa es picante, because that is my opinion. Okay, and then the D in periodic stands for deadline. So this would be like saying, the essay is for Monday, or the paper is for Tuesday, or something like that. So an example would be, the essay is for Friday. So then I would say, el ensayo es para viernes. Because that's the deadline, so I'd use para. Okay, for the I in periodic, the second one, it stands for in direction of. And this one is a bit confusing, but it's like saying if you're flying in the direction of somewhere, you use this. So if you're saying like the family travels in the direction of Florida, you would say La familia viaja para Florida. This one isn't as commonly seen. And the last way you use para is comparison. So when you're comparing two things, so in periodic, C stands for comparison. And this is like when you're comparing for someone, you are not this, or like for this, you are not. So an example would be for a smart person, you say silly things. So I could say, in translation, para una persona inteligente, tú dices cosas chistosas. So like, for someone, I'm comparing you, you still say silly things. So para, as you can see, is more used for translating words like these, for, in order to, according to, by, on, yeah. The acronyms I gave are not the extensive list of when you use por versus para, but it is a good thing to keep in mind because those are the most common ways you will use por versus para. So just to reiterate, for por, you use more for unit of measure, numbers, exchanging, and para is used more for purpose, what you're doing, why you're doing this, to say what you're thinking. And that's basically what you have to remember when you're trying to figure out when to use por versus when to use para. Okay, so here's a practice. So if I'm trying to say they talk for 3 hours, ellos hablan blank 3 hours, what do you think it would be? So I want you to pause and try to think, and then I'll give the answer. If you said por, you are correct. And the reason this is por is because it fits D in the dumbest acronym for por, duration. They talk for 3 hours is a duration. Okay, so here's another example. I buy food for the party. Yo compro comida blank la fiesta. So what do you think you use for this? Do you use por or use para? Try to think about it and think of the acronyms periodic for para, dumbest for por, and pause the video and I'll give the answer when you come back. Okay, so if you said para, you are correct. And this fits periodic, and it fits P for purpose. I bought the food for the party, which is you bought the food for the purpose of the party, so that is why it's para. Okay, so here's an infographic you could also use for por versus para. So para would be all of these things, if we're trying to keep the same color coding. And por would be these things, which is kind of what we went through with the acronyms. Dumbest, as por is used for reasoning, traveling, duration, or if you're saying it's by someone. And para is mainly used for purposing, final destination, deadlines, and if you're giving someone something. Okay, so here's por versus para, and I have the acronym written down for each. So if you want, you can take a screenshot of this for later memorization or later help if you need it. And so in the end, I hope this video helped you with por versus para, and I hope you now understand how to use por versus para and when you use them. If not, please leave us feedback and questions below. Thank you so much for watching.